The Ummerlin seat is dead, Arganda reported. Blood and bloody ashes, Matt thought. Egwene. Not Egwene, too. It hit him like a punch to the face. What's more, Arganda continued, the Aes Sedai report that they have lost over half their numbers. The remaining ones claim, and this is a quote, that they couldn't channel enough of the One power to lift a feather. They're out of the battle. Matt grunted. How many of the Sharan channelers did they take? He asked, bracing himself. All of them. Matt looked at Arganda and frowned. What? All of the channelers, Arganda said. All the ones that were fighting the Aes Sedai. That's something, Matt said. But Egwene. No thinking of that right now. She and her people had stopped the Sharan channelers. The Sharans and Trollocs fell back from the front lines to regroup. Matt took the opportunity to do the same. His forces, what remained of them, was strung out across the heights. He had joined together everyone he had left. The Borderlanders, the Dragonsworn, Loyal and the Ogier, Tam's troops, the White Cloaks, soldiers of the Band of the Red Hand. They fought hard, but their foe greatly outnumbered them. It was bad enough when they just had the Sharans to contend with. But once the Trollocs had broken through the eastern edge of the heights, they were forced to defend themselves on two fronts. Over the past hour, they had been pushed back more than 1,000 paces in a northerly direction, and their back ranks had almost reached the end of the plateau. This would be the last push, the end of the battle. With the Sharan channelers gone, Matt would not be wiped out immediately, but light. There were still so many bloody Trollocs left. Matt had danced this dance well. He knew he had. But there was only so much a man could do. Even Tuon's return might not be enough, if it came. Arganda handled reports from the other areas of the battlefield. The man was wounded badly enough he could not fight, and there was no one with enough of the power left to spare for healing. He did his job well. Good man. Matt could have used him in the band. The Trollocs gathered for their push, again moving bodies out of the way, forming into fists with Myrddraal leading them. That would give Matt 5 or 10 minutes to get ready. Then it would come. Lan walked over, expression grim. What would you have my men do, Cawthon? Get ready to fight those Trollocs, Matt said. Has anyone checked with Mayenne lately? Now would be a wonderful time to get back a few of the ranks of men who have been healed. I will check on it for you, Lan said. And then I will prepare my men. Matt dug in his saddlebags as Lan withdrew. He pulled out Rand's banner, the one of the ancient Aes Sedai. He'd gathered it earlier, thinking perhaps it might have some use. Somebody hoist this thing up. We're fighting in Rand's bloody name. Let's show the Shadow we're proud of it. Daniel took the banner, finding a spear to use as a pole. Matt took a deep breath. The way the Borderlanders spoke, they thought this would end in a glorious, heroic, suicidal charge. That was how Tom's songs always ended, the kinds of songs Matt had hoped to never find himself in. Faint hope that was now. Think. In the distance, the Trolloc horns started blowing. Tuon had delayed. Was she going to come? He hoped secretly she would not. With the battle going so poorly, even the Seanchan might not be enough. He needed an opening. Come on, luck. Another gateway opened, and Arganda went to collect the messenger's report. Matt did not need to hear to realize the kind of news it was, as when Arganda returned, he was frowning. All right, Matt said, sighing. Give me your news. The Queen of Andor is dead, Arganda said. Bloody ashes. Not Elaine. Matt felt a lurch inside. Rand. I'm sorry. Who leads there? Bashir? Dead, Arganda said. And his wife. They fell during attack against the Andoran pikemen. We've lost 6 Aiel clan chiefs as well. Nobody leads the Andorans or the Aiel at the riverbed. They're crumbling fast.
This is the end.
Demandred's augmented voice washed across Matt from the other end of the plateau.
Luz Theron has abandoned you. Cry out to him as you die. Let him feel your pain.
They had arrived at the last few moves in their game, and Demandred had played well. Matt looked over his army of exhausted troops, many of them wounded. There was no denying it. They were in a desperate situation. "Send for the Aes Sedai," Matt said. "I don't care if they say they can't lift a feather. Maybe when it comes down to their lives, they'll find a little strength for a fireball here and there. Besides, their warders can still fight." Arganda nodded. Nearby, a gateway opened, and two beleaguered-looking Ashimans stumbled out. Nave and Niald bore scorch marks on their skins, and Nave's Aes Sedai was not with them. "Well?" Matt asked the three. "It is done," Niald said with a growl. "What of Tuon?" "They found the spy, apparently," Nave said. "The Empress is waiting to return on your mark." Matt breathed in, tasting the battlefield air, feeling the rhythm of the fighting he had set up. He didn't know if he could win, even with Tuon. Not with Elaine's army in disarray, not with the Aes Sedai weakened to the point of being unable to channel, not without Egwene, her two rivers' stubbornness, her iron backbone. Not without a miracle. "Send for Nafe," Matt said. He called for paper and a pen and scribbled a note, which he handed off to the Ashaman. He shoved aside the selfish desire to let Tuon fly to safety. Bloody ashes. There was no safety, not anywhere. "Give this to the Empress, Nafe. Tell her these instructions must be followed exactly." Then Matt turned to Niald. "I want you to go to Telmanus," he said. "Have him move forward with the plan." The two channelers left, off to deliver their messages. "Will it be enough?" Arganda asked. "No," Matt said. "Then why?" "Because I'll be a dark friend before I let this battle go without trying everything, Arganda."
"Luz Theron,"
Demandred boomed.
"Come face me. I know you watched this battle. Join it. Fight!"
"I sure am growing tired of that man," Matt said. "Cawthon, look. Those Trollocs have regrouped," Arganda said. "I think they are about to attack." "Then this is it. Let's form up," Matt said. "Where is Lan? Has he come back yet? I'd hate to do this without him." Matt turned, scanning the lines for him, as Arganda shouted orders. His attention was drawn back suddenly as Arganda grabbed his arm, pointing toward the Trollocs. Matt felt a chill as he saw in the light of bonfires a lone horseman on a black stallion charge into the right flank of the Trolloc horde, making for the eastern slope of the heights, toward Demandred. Lan had gone to fight a war on his own. The Trollocs ripped at Ulver's arm in the night, reaching into the crack, trying to pry him free. Others dug at the sides and soil streamed in onto him, sticking to the tears on his cheeks and the blood flowing from his scratches. He couldn't stop shaking. He also couldn't make himself move. He trembled, terrified, as the beasts pried at him with filthy fingers, digging closer and closer. Loyal sat on a stump, resting before the battle picked up again. A charge. Yes, that would be a good way for this to end. Loyal felt sore all over. He had read a great deal about battle, and had been in fights before, so he had known what to expect. But knowing a thing and experiencing it were completely different. That was why he'd left the steading in the first place. After more than a day of non-stop fighting, his limbs burned with a deep inner fatigue. When he raised his axe, the head felt so heavy he wondered why it didn't break the shaft. War. He could have lived his life without experiencing this. It was so much more than the frantic battle at the Two Rivers had been. There, at least, they'd had time to remove the dead and care for their wounded. There, it had been a matter of standing firm and holding against waves of attacks. Here, there was no time to wait, no time to think. Aerith sat down on the ground beside his stump, and he put a hand on her shoulder. She closed her eyes and leaned against him. She was beautiful, with perfect ears and wonderful eyebrows. Loyal did not look at the bloodstains on her clothing. He feared some of it was hers. He rubbed her shoulder with fingers so tired he could barely feel them. Loyal had taken some notes on the battlefield, for himself and for others, to keep track of how the battle had gone so far. Yes, a final attack. That would make for a good ending to the story once he wrote it. He pretended that he would still write the story. There was no harm to such a little lie. One rider burst from the ranks of their soldiers, galloping toward the Trolloc right flank. Matt would not be happy about that. One man alone would die. Loyal was surprised that he could feel sorrow for that man's life lost, after all of the death he had seen.
That man looks familiar,
Loyal thought. Yes, it was the horse. He'd seen that horse before many times.
Lan.
He thought, numb.
Lan is the one riding out alone.
Loyal stood. Aerith looked up at him as he shouldered his axe.
Wait,
Loyal said to her.
Fight alongside the others. I must go. Go? I need to witness this,
Loyal said. The fall of the last king of the Melchieri. He would need to include it in his book.
Prepare to charge,
Arganda yelled.
Men, form up. Archers at the front, cavalry next. Foot soldiers, prepare to come up behind.
A charge, Tam thought. Yes, that is our only hope. They had to continue their push, but their line was so thin. He could see what Matt had been trying, but it wasn't going to work. They needed to fight it through anyway. Well, he is dead, a mercenary said from near Tam, nodding toward Lan Mandragoran as he rode toward the Trolloc flank. Bloody borderlanders.
Tam,
Audible said from beside him. Above them, the sky grew darker. Was that possible at night? Those terrible boiling clouds seemed to come lower and lower. Tam almost lost Lan's figure atop the midnight stallion, despite the bonfires burning on the heights. Their light seemed feeble. He's riding for Demandred, Tam thought. But there's a wall of Trollocs in the way. Tam took out an arrow with a resin-soaked rag tied behind the head and knocked it into his bow.
2 rivers, men. Prepare to fire.
The mercenary nearby laughed.
That's 100 paces at least. You'll fill him with arrows, if anything.
Tam eyed the man, then took his arrow and thrust the end into a torch. The bundled rag behind the head came alight with fire.
First rank, on my signal,
Tam yelled, ignoring the other orders that came down the line.
Let's give Lord Mandragoran a little something to guide his way.
Tam drew in a fluid motion, the burning rag warming his fingers, and loosed. Lan charged toward the Trollocs. His lance and his 3 replacements had all shattered hours ago. At his neck he wore the cold medallion that Berylane had sent through the gateway with a simple note. I do not know how Galad ended up with this, but I believe he wished me to send it to Cawthon. Lan did not consider what he was doing. The Void did not allow such things. Some men would call it brash, foolhardy, suicidal. The world was rarely changed by men who were unwilling to try being at least one of the 3. He sent what comfort he could to distant Nynaeve through the bond, then prepared to fight. As Lan neared the Trollocs, the beasts set up a spear line to stop him. A horse would impale itself trying to push through that. Lan drew in breath, calm within the void, planning to slice the head off the first spear, then ram his way through the line. It was an impossible maneuver. All the Trollocs would need to do was squeeze together and slow him. After that, they would overwhelm Mandarb and pull Lan from the saddle. But someone had to destroy Demandred. With the medallion at his neck, Lan raised his sword. A flaming arrow streaked down from the sky and hit the throat of the Trolloc right in front of Lan. Without hesitation, Lan used the fallen Trolloc as an opening in the line of spears. He crashed through the shadow spawn, trampling the fallen one. He would need to. Another arrow fell, dropping a Trolloc. Then another and another in quick succession. Mandarb crashed through the confused, burning and dying Trollocs as an entire rain of burning arrows dropped in front of him.
"Melkir!"
Lan yelled, heeling Mandarb forward, trampling corpses but maintaining speed as the way opened. A hail of light dropped before him, each arrow precise, killing a Trolloc that tried to stand before him. He thundered through the ranks, shoving aside dying Trollocs, flaming arrows guiding his way in the darkness like a roadway. The Trollocs stood thick on either side, but those in front of him dropped and dropped until there were no more. "Thank you, Tam." Lan cantered his steed along the eastern slope of the heights, alone now, past the soldiers, past the shadow spawn. He was one with the breeze that streamed through his hair, one with the sinewy animal beneath him that carried him forward, one with the target that was his destination, his fate. Demandred stood at the sound of the hoofbeats, his Sharan companions rising in front of him. With a roar, Lan heeled Mandarb into the Sharans that blocked his path. The stallion leaped, front legs driving the guards before him into the ground. Mandarb wheeled around, his haunches knocking down more Sharans, his forelegs coming down on yet others. Lan threw himself from the saddle. Mandarb had no protection against channeling, and so to fight from horseback would be to invite Demandred to kill his mount, and hit the ground at a run, sword out.
"Another one?"
Demandred roared.
"Lose Theron, you are beginning to—"
He cut off as Lan reached him and flung himself into thistledown floats on the whirlwind, a tempestuous offensive sword form. Demandred whipped his sword up, catching the blow on his weapon and skidding backward a step at the force of it. They exchanged 3 blows, quick as cracks of lightning, Lan still in motion until the last blow caught Demandred on the cheek. Lan felt a slight tug, and blood sprayed into the air. Demandred felt at the wound in his cheek, and his eyes opened wider.
"Who are you?"
Demandred asked.
"I am the man who will kill you."
Min looked up from the back of her Torm as it loped toward the gateway back to the battlefield at Merilor. She hoped it would withstand the battle frenzy when they got there. Bonfires and torches shone in the distance, fireflies illuminating scenes of valor and determination. She watched the lights flicker, the last embers of a fire that would soon be extinguished. Rand trembled, distant, far to the north.
The pattern spun around Rand, forcing him to watch. He looked through eyes streaming with tears. He saw the people struggle. He saw them fall. He saw Elaine, captive and alone, a dreadlord preparing to rip their children from her womb. He saw Ruark, his mind forfeit, now a pawn of one of the Forsaken. He saw Matt, desperate, facing down horrible odds. He saw Lan riding to his death. Demandred's words dug at him. The Dark One's pressure continued to tear at him. Rand had failed. But in the back of his mind, a voice. Frail, almost forgotten. Let go. Lan held nothing back. He did not fight as he had trained Rand to fight. No careful testing, no judging the terrain, no careful evaluation. Demandred could channel, and despite the medallion, Lan couldn't give his enemy time to think, time to weave and hurl rocks at him or open the ground beneath him. Lan burrowed deeply into the void, allowing instincts to guide him. He went beyond lack of emotions, burning away everything. He did not need to judge the terrain, for he felt the land as if it were part of him. He did not need to test Demandred's strength. One of the Forsaken, with many decades of experience, would be the most skilled swordsman Lan had ever faced. Lan was vaguely aware of the Sharans spreading out to make a broad circle around the two combatants as they fought. Apparently, Demandred was confident enough of his skills that he did not allow interference from others. Lan spun into a sequence of attacks. Water flows downhill became whirlwind on the mountain, which became hawk dives into the brush. His forms were like streams blending into a larger and larger river. Demandred fought as well as Lan had feared. Though the man's forms were slightly different from those Lan knew, the years had not changed the nature of a sword fight.
You are good,
Demandred said with a grunt, falling back before wind and rain, a line of blood dripping from his chin. Lan's sword flashed in the air, reflecting the red light of a bonfire nearby. Demandred came back with striking the spark, which Lan anticipated, countering. He took a scratch along the side, but ignored it. The exchange set Lan back a step, and gave Demandred the chance to pick up a rock with the one power and hurl it at Lan. Deep within the void, Lan felt the stone coming. It was an understanding of the fight, one that ran deeply into him, to the very core of his soul. The way Demandred stepped, the direction his eyes flickered told Lan exactly what was coming. As he flowed into his next sword form, Lan brought his weapon up across his chest and stepped backward. A stone the size of a man's head passed directly in front of him. Lan flowed forward, arm moving into his next form as another stone flew under his arm, tugging wind with it. Lan raised his sword and flowed around the path of a third stone, which missed him by a thumb's width, rippling his clothing. Demandred blocked Lan's attack, but he breathed hoarsely.
Who are you?
Demandred whispered again.
No one of this age has such skill. Asmodean? No, he couldn't have fought me like this. Luz Theron? It is you behind that mask, isn't it? I am just a man,
Lan whispered.
That is all I have ever been.
Demandred growled, then launched an attack. Lan responded with stones falling down the mountain, but Demandred's fury forced him back a few steps. Despite Lan's initial offensive, Demandred was the better swordsman. Lan knew this by the same sense that told him when to strike, when to parry, when to step, and when to withdraw. Perhaps if they had come to the fight evenly, it would be different. They had not. Lan had been fighting for an entire day, and though he'd been healed from his worst wounds, the smaller ones still ached. Beyond that, a healing in and of itself was draining. Demandred was still fresh. The Forsaken stopped talking and engrossed himself in the duel. He also stopped using the one power, focused only on his swordplay. He did not grin as he took the advantage. He did not seem like a man who grinned very often. Lan slipped away from Demandred, but the Forsaken pressed forward with boar rushes down the mountain, again pushing Lan back to the perimeter of the circle, battering at his defenses, cutting him on the arm, then the shoulder, then finally the thigh.
I've only time for one last lesson. I have you,
Demandred finally growled, breathing heavily.
Whoever you are, I have you. You cannot win. You didn't listen to me,
Lan whispered.
One last lesson. The hardest.
Demandred struck, and Lan saw his opening. Lan lunged forward, placing Demandred's sword point against his own side and ramming himself forward onto it.
I did not come here to win,
Lan whispered, smiling.
I came here to kill you. Death is lighter than a feather.
Demandred's eyes opened wide, and he tried to pull back. Too late. Lan's sword took him straight through the throat. The world grew dark as Lan slipped backward off the sword. He felt Nynaeve's fear and pain as he did, and he sent his love to her.